What time is it?
Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.
So starting things off, what inspired you to write this book?
Chad, first off, yeah, hats off to Chad, the legend. He's influential in getting this book together, and thank you for having me on here. It's an honor. So when you're doing books, for me, it always helps to do something that you're passionate about, to have that be your subject. And hip hop has definitely been a constant, lifelong ally for me. I looked at, we were coming along 50 years of hip hop, and unlike a lot of musical genres, that's relatively short. You look at jazz or blues or other musical genres, they've been around a lot longer. And with this one, you still have a lot of the pioneers and bricklayers and originators among us. So I thought it would be cool to try and do a book in their words while we still can.
For this book, you did you did 300 interviews in over 3 years. How did that final number compare to your initial plan, and how did you put together such an ambitious project?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, I knew it was an ambitious project, but still, I probably didn't completely appreciate the total scope of it until I was fully dived in. I think at the beginning, I compiled like a long list, and I read a lot of history of hip hop books, and there have been a couple really good ones like Dan Charnas's Big Payback and Jeff Chang, Can't Stop, Won't Stop. Those were really foundational for me. And I just wrote down a lot of names, and 300, it seems like a lot, but trust me, I had like thousands of people that I wanted to talk to. And it was just a matter of trying to get in touch with people, because I knew going in that I would be able to get to some people and some people I couldn't.
Were there people, and I'm not asking you to name names, but were there people that you reached out to that respectfully declined, or that you just weren't able to connect with?
Yeah, of course. I think, you go through the list and you look at kind of the Mount Rushmore of titans, and there's been a lot of hip hop where a lot of the artists are in charge of their own story. So somebody like Nas has a documentary about him, or that he helped produce, and Rakim wrote his memoir. And there are a lot of people like that where they rightfully want to control their story. And I knew like people like those would be tough to get in touch with. What I was really happy with was being able to shine a light on people who aren't necessarily as well known, but who had a great impact. Somebody like MC Shaw Rock, or somebody like Duke Booty, Edwin Fletcher, who wrote The Message. People like when they were doing hip hop at about the time when this genre was just formulating, they didn't know that it was going to become this grand genre that's going to permeate every strand of American culture and a lot of the world's culture. So their perspective is invaluable.
What was the most exciting era of hip hop to hear about through your interviews?
Man, I grew up West Coast in the late 80s, early 90s. So being able to
That's like
report,
the best time.
yeah, I wouldn't trade that era for any time in the world. So all through the NWA, the Chronic, Doggy Style, Tupac, all that stuff is straight up in my lane.
One West Coast album that I don't think gets enough credit is the Far Side's Bizarre Ride to the Far Side.
I know.
The main West Coast classics, for whatever reason, that doesn't come up enough.
The other person, I feel like he gets a lot of love on the West Coast, but he should get more love nationally, is DJ Quick.
Oh, heck yeah. What's the name? Tonight? That's like one of the best party songs ever.
I know. I used to, because I went to USC, and I had my roommate, his name was Mike P, and Tonight he shouts out a Mike P in the song. So we used to always play that song before he went out.
You mentioned kind of that era. Do you have a favorite album? If I know there are probably too many to choose from, but like this is the album, or this is the piece of music that represents me the most in my most favorite time.
Yeah, I would probably say it's, when you look at the full scope of it, it's a little bloated, but I would say All Eyes on Me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that to me is my favorite Tupac album. Tupac's my favorite artist. I think a double album was a little bit ambitious. I wish it would have been narrowed down some, but yeah, I would say that
He did
album.
it in 15 days, and he came up with what he came up with, and that's incredible. And Life Goes On is one of the best songs ever made.
Yeah, without a doubt. There's I mean, like for me, when I was growing up, Tupac was everything for me. And I had one of those, like my mom was, she took one look at a parental advisory sticker and would have me going back to Radio Shack or Circuit City or whatever to return the album. So I found different ways to hide my CDs. And I remember her making me take my Tupac CD back, and I just found a different way to hide it, because Tupac, he was my everything, man.
Is that the art? Is that the album you talk about in the thank yous when you said thank you, mom, for that album you confiscated? Look where it took me.
Yeah, yeah. It
No, I
was
was
that
the
one.
same way. I'd always look for ones. The trick was to find ones with the price tags over the parental advisory sticker. That was the best bet.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Was there a piece of information that you were maybe previously misinformed about, but an interview corrected your understanding of?
That's a good question. I want to say that I don't think I went into this with a closed mind about anything. I think that's just my reporting and journalism background, is just to be open to wherever the reporting takes me. So, and I think doing it this way, like with an oral history, when it's people's words, there's definitely going to be moments when people's memories conflict. And that happened a few times throughout the book. I think one of the times it happened was Russell Simmons and Public Enemy's demo. Like, I think Professor Griff, remember, like Russell Simmons threw their demo out the window, and Russell Simmons said no, that he was a fan of Public Enemy from the get-go. So for my purposes, for oral history, it's almost better when there's conflict in the narrative and people's memories don't necessarily align, because then they can go back and forth in the book.
In that instance, were you able to say, or from your journalistic standpoint, did you say something like, oh, well, here's your story, but Griff says this or whoever says this? Were you able to do that, or did you just let them tell their story?
I just let them tell their story, because stuff happened so long ago, that I think viewpoints and stances have hardened, and that, everybody's truth at this point is their own.
One person you interviewed that I thought was great, and I think some fans, perhaps younger ones especially, might not be familiar with it, is the whole 2 Live Crew controversy, and what all of that did for free speech, and how you interviewed their attorney Bruce Rogow. What was that like?
It was good to do, because Bruce had this memory of it all like it happened yesterday, because he wasn't a hip hop guy hitting into this and suddenly found himself almost thrown into the middle of one of hip hop's biggest controversies to that point in 2 Live Crew. So it was like he was learning about it as he was also defending it. So being able to talk to him about it was really, and he was funny. He was a funny interview.
Yeah, I remember reading how he was like, oh yeah, I talked to Grandmaster, Flash, and he was explaining call and response to me, and just very breaking down some of the fundamentals of hip hop that if you weren't familiar with it, you would have no frame of reference for.
Yeah, and he brought in Henry Louis Gates during the trial to help defend hip hop, which was really interesting to me. I don't think I knew that beforehand.
Do you have a moment, a time, moment, or era that stands out to you where hip hop affected your life the most?
Yeah, and I would go back to that early 90s LA gangster rap era, where it just seemed like that was the hip hop epicenter. When Death Row was at its peak, and you had sonically Dr. Dre coming out with the G-Funk, and it's perfect music to ride in the car to, with the synthesizers and the P-Funk. You have Snoop Dogg with the 1, 2, 3 into the 4, and just his cadence, I don't think it could ever be replicated. And somebody like Tupac, who to me embodied every bit of humanity and the Black experience, as far as somebody who could go scorched earth, somebody who could be a poet, somebody who could be delicate, somebody who could be who could write a song like I Get Around to Dear Mama. I mean, it's just an amazing range.
And you believed him. You believed him when you listened to Dear Mama, and you believed him when you listened to Hit 'Em Up.
Exactly.
Just as a Pac fan myself, where do you, my personal favorite Pac album, when I want to know what ranks on your list, if you got All Eyes on Me at number 1, where do you rank Me Against the World?
Probably number 2,
Yeah.
followed by Tupacalypse.
Where do you put Machiavelli?
It's not one of my highest.
I definitely understand why people rank it as high as they do. So I would never say that it's not a classic or anything like that, but it definitely didn't speak to me the way some of his other stuff did.
Let me hear your rankings for Pac.
I'd say Me Against the World. I would say then All Eyes on Me. Then I probably put Strictly For My in there. Machiavelli, Tupacalypse Now, and then on the Thug Life album. Again, being a little bit younger, I feel like Tupacalypse Now, first of all, that's like one of the best album titles ever. I feel like that was kind of something you had to really like live through to appreciate. Because by the time I was introduced to Pac, like Dear Mama had come out and stuff like that. So to be able to appreciate something like Brenda's Got a Baby when there was nothing else like that, I wasn't really there for that moment.
I can definitely see that. And to me, Brenda's Got a Baby is so just genius, and just like I can remember like being young and listening to that song and it like giving me the education that I wasn't getting in school, you know?
Yeah. Did you find there's sometimes a lot of, sometimes static between the generations, different generations of hip hop? Did you find that there was a lot of that when you were talking to people?
I think that there's 2 different school of thoughts. I think, somebody like DMC, who I talked to for this book, was straight up saying that he didn't lead hip hop in this direction for the stuff that's coming out today.
Mhm.
Or somebody like Styles P will be like, am I going to mess with a lot of the music that's coming out today? Probably not, but I can understand that this is the music for the kids, and that 20 years from now, this is going to be their classics that are coming out today. And, my kids are going to be listening to this 10, 20, 30 years down the road. And that, hip hop is really 360 and cyclical, and what's hot now may not be hot tomorrow, but it'll be hot 5 years from now. So hopefully the lyricism can come back.
Who was your favorite person that you interviewed for the book?
Probably Cool Modi,
Mm-hmm.
just because he was so, and it was funny because I remember I called him up at the time I was supposed to call him, and Ann Carly, who was an amazing early female executive with Jive and did a lot of tremendous stuff in this genre, she had helped set up the interview. And I called him at the time I was supposed to call him, and he answered and he was like, hello, like real gruff, like, and I was like, oh man, this interview is gonna suck, like he forgot about it. And that, trust me, that happened a couple of times with different people, where no matter what tact I took, I couldn't get good stuff for the book. But once like I reminded him like why I was calling and what it was for, it was one of the best interviews of my life. And he was just so expansive and knowledgeable about his place in hip hop, and about where hip hop had been and where it was going and what he had done for it, to where it wasn't even an interview. It was just soaking up so much knowledge from him. Cause he was like, people forget, like he was there at the like almost the very, very beginning, but then his career really stretched through different generations of this thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember he used to do those hip hop report cards
With the grades, yep.
and did you ever read that book he put out? It's probably been 20, like his list of like the 50 greatest MCs, and that was very comprehensive and articulate, and very solid arguments.
Yeah, no, I agree.
One thing that's interesting for me, and again, I don't want to speak for you, but again, just seeing people reflect on things that are history that we lived through in real time. Like it was really cool reading about, the rise of Jay-Z and Rockefeller and hip hop in New York, kind of that resurgence, and talking to people like Just Blaze. Like that was really cool.
Yeah, he was another one of my favorite interviews. And he was almost this prodigy, because he had skipped a couple grades when he was younger. And by the time he was in college, I want to say he was like 16. So he was like 16, 17, DJing in these clubs in New Jersey and on the come up. And yeah, I mean, to have been like a fly on that wall during the early Rockefeller days, when, it's not just Blaze, but Kanye's trying to make a name for himself. And You know, Jay-Z is obviously at the head of the table, but then you have all these Memphis Bleak and all these other artists coming through. I mean, it must have been an amazing time.
What do you hope that this book can accomplish?
I hope that its history is captured, and I hope that when people think about hip hop and they see how far it's traveled in the last 50 years, that this is the greatest come up in history to me, how it rose out of decay and desolation in the Bronx to really capture, you know, every strand of American pop culture. And I wanted to tell that story and tell it through the voices and the thoughts and the words of the people who helped create it and push it and propel it forward. So, and I wrote it, you know, for people like you and me who treasure and appreciate this culture and where it came from.
Well, that's wonderful, man. Yeah, and then this is the book, The Come On. Is there anything you want to add before anything you want to add or comment on before we wrap up?
No, I just appreciate this time with you. And you can get the book, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever books are sold.
What time is it?
Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.